Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today from St. Louis in Missouri, the USA, of course, Christy Maxfield, who's from Purpose First Advisor, and they have a purpose, no surprise. Their purpose is enabling people and communities to build generational wealth through entrepreneurship. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Christy. It's a great privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here.
Tom Ruich, who was our guest on episode 483 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, he suggested that we have you on the podcast and introduced us. So big hello to Tom.
Absolutely. We go way back. We know each other through a few different businesses and experiences.
Yeah, and you're both in the same home city, right?
We are. And St. Louis is a big, small city. So once you know a few people, you know a lot of people.
Right. Okay. Excellent. All right. Now, you believe that building a business should be kind of a bold adventure that creates happiness and prosperity, both for the individuals involved, for their families, and for communities. I love that. That sort of encapsulates another part of your purpose statement, I guess. And I love the idea of the bold adventure. I've found in my entrepreneurial journey, it's been probably the most fun I've had and the most challenge I've had, and also the most I've learnt in my life. And I've spent a lot of time, well, pretty much all my life learning, but this has been certainly one of the most informative and educational experiences that I can remember. So I'm really looking forward to digging into all of that with you some more.
Yay.
But before we do that, what's the impact you're leaving in the world today?
Well, you kind of touched on it, the creation of wealth through entrepreneurship. So typically women entrepreneurs, and I can really only speak for the United States, but I suspect some of these trends are more widespread. But women entrepreneurs in the United States and entrepreneurs of color tend to build smaller businesses than other demographic groups. And what happens typically is we don't build businesses that are over $1 million. We don't hire people besides ourselves, and we have trouble accessing capital. And so, I really get excited about who I can work with to help them do any one of those things. And even if they don't aspire to have $1 million plus business or employees, but they do hope to grow and get the most out of their business and their business idea, I want to be part of that with them and really open up the possibilities for them. So entrepreneurship to me is a way we can fulfill our own personal dreams, but we can also create more wealth for ourselves and our families and our communities than usually we can do with a wage-paying job.
Yeah, it's certainly, there's endless possibilities, right? But there's lots of hurdles and lots of challenges that we're faced with. That certainly coming out of the corporate world, I didn't really realize. I mean, I'd had a long corporate career, and I knew there were all these issues you had to deal with as a business, but there's a lot of surprises that came my way as a small business. I kind of had plans in place for the issues, but then, I didn't know that was going to come up. So
there's lots of uncertainty.
Yeah. You mentioned that women and particularly people of color, typically in the US, and I'm pretty sure this is the same in Australia, there seems to be a bit of a glass ceiling, if you like, on and maybe they set it themselves. Maybe it's the society that sets it because of the societal prejudices that we still deal with these days. How do you think? Like, what are the key factors you think that influence that, and what are some of the things that all of us could do to start to make it easier?
Yeah. So the two prongs. Again, in the States, there's institutional racism, systemic racism, and so that's perpetuated as it's systemic. It's not just an individual choice. It's really built into the fabric of our communities and our institutions. And then we internalize racism and sexism and other isms along the way as well. And so society has set up a system that seeks to perpetuate those preferences. And we internalize a lot of messages about what we could, should, or might want to do and be. So really the approach has to be twofold. How do we change the systems so they are more equitable? They have less built-in barriers to all the things that everyone wants to have a successful and fulfilling life. And then how do we change the mental models of individuals and people working individually and people working in organizations together about who's capable, what they're capable of, who gets to dream, how they get to dream. At this moment in time, the founder of WeWork, who happens to be a white man, WeWork has imploded. Hundreds of millions of dollars of investor dollars are gone. And he has new investors already.
Yeah.
And very rarely does a woman or an entrepreneur of color get a first bite at the apple, let alone a second bite at the apple. And so, is all of that a function of racism and sexism? No, but there's a lot of that going on in there, and it's worth examining. So when we think about it, we all have individual work to do, and that's about understanding the role we play and how our thinking influences that. And we have institutions we need to change. So at an ecosystem level, when you're involved either as an entrepreneur or as an entrepreneur support organization, we have to face those realities and then figure out how we're going to dismantle or rearrange or disrupt what's going on that way. And that's long-term work.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess one of the things I always wonder about, and as someone that believes that everybody has the capability to do extraordinary things, and it's not about what race they belong to, what gender they are, whatever else that they attach to their identity. But as you said, the system has everybody. I mean, we're all categorized in the system to make the system work, and it's all about having the system work. It doesn't really care about the individuals, and so we're categorized, and by being categorized, it places limits. And I mean, that's true of all of us, but some categories suffer more because they've got different limits placed on them.
The system's designed that way, right? For there to be inequities.
So as individuals that kind of see this as wrong, how can we what are some little things that we can do to start taking regular actions, consistent actions that influence change in the system?
Yeah. I talk about and think about for myself, what privilege or access or resources might I have that someone else may not have access to? And how can I be proactive in the role that I have and make choices that make them more accessible? So what does that mean? It means if somebody calls me to be on a podcast, I might say yes. I might say yes, and I'd really like for you to speak to my other colleagues and raise up people who typically aren't identified as being in that mix, but they're just as awesome, if not more awesome than me. I might say, thank you, no, but please interview this person instead, because I've gotten a lot of airtime and they haven't, and they're doing amazing, phenomenal things that you're not aware of. So how can I use the position, power, privilege that I might have in ways great and small? If I'm invited to be on a panel and I see there's no women of color, no people of color, I'm the only woman, let's say, then I can have a conversation with the leadership. I can choose to engage. I can choose to ask questions. I can choose to make suggestions. And the awareness and then the conscious choice to make a different decision, a different choice, I think is really where we can start as individuals. And particularly when we know that there are definitely things as a white woman I have an easier time doing, getting, or otherwise making available in the world. And so then the question has to become for me, how do I become more aware of that? I think there's also another level is as people explore what's possible for them, entrepreneurship's not for everybody. Yeah. It's just not, right? But one of the things we find is that we need role models. We need to see somebody who kind of looks like us, who kind of sounds like us, who kind of came from the same background, to say, oh my God, if she can do it, I can totally do it.
That's right. Yeah.
And so the times where you can act in that role model role by sharing your successes, maybe it's a LinkedIn post that says, I did this hard thing, right? Maybe it's going on a podcast and saying, this is my journey, and these are the things I struggle with and how I'm doing it. I think we underestimate the power of our own personal story in being able to help inspire others as well.
Yeah, there's a lot there, isn't there? And I think this concept of privilege, and it kind of ties back to, we take a lot of things for granted. I mean, as entrepreneurs, we have skills that we take for granted, absolutely. And I have this experience I have it quite a lot, pre-pandemic in particular, where I'd meet with somebody and we'd be working through something, and they'd be sitting beside me as I was showing them how to do something. And all of a sudden they'd pull me up and they'd say, hang on, that step, what did you just do then? That was amazing. And it would be something that I kind of like, it was completely unconscious to me that I went from A to B. It was almost like changing gears in the car while I'm driving, and they'd pull me up and they'd say, oh, you just changed gear. How did you do that? That was amazing. So we take things like that for granted. And I kind of often reflect on those, and I say, well, there's clearly value in that for other people. And yet I take it for granted because it just comes naturally to me. The idea of privilege, I think, is consistent with that, because so here I am, white male, born into the most privileged kind of category, if we're going to categorize people, that exists today in Western society, in a democratic country that's free, that's got wonderful nature and everything, and we take a lot of that for granted, and only when we kind of see the contrasts and all of a sudden see, hey, there's people in other countries that are in war zones, that are suffering hunger and thirst, that don't have fresh water, and so on, that we start to reflect on that. But at a different level, it's like within our own societies, where are those differences? What do you think we can do to kind of make those contrasts more visible in our own consciousness, so that we start to take some of the actions you've suggested?
Yeah. I want to go back just a second to the thing I found obvious, and somebody else, only because my high school English teacher used to write IGO at the top of your page if it was just the instant grasp of the obvious and you didn't go deeper, and she wanted you to go deeper. Yeah. And what I found as an adult is my instant grasp of the obvious is your revelation. And that I can't underestimate how important it is for me to share the things that come naturally to me, and also be compensated for them in some situations, because we all have different gifts. And just because it's easy for you doesn't mean you shouldn't be compensated for it. That's one thing. In terms of, how do we look at these categorizations and the systemic nature of how we are? It's choosing to be aware. When you have privilege, part of the privilege you're experiencing is if you don't want to deal with it, you don't have to. And so how do you put yourself in situations where you choose to be engaged in it? You choose to grapple with what's going on. Do you choose to go and meet with a group of Black entrepreneurs and be there as an observer and a supporter, knowing you're going to be the only white person in the room, and that your needs are not the most important thing going on there? And are you willing to go and support them? Are you willing to show up? Are you willing to ask them what they need rather than assume what they need? Are you willing to, put aside whatever your personal agenda is or your ego is, and really offer yourself up as somebody of service, to say, I want to support you. I may not understand the best way to support you. And please help me understand how I might be able to do that. And then when you do make a mistake, because you're going to make a mistake, be sincere in apologizing for it. Offer to make amends. Find out what you need to do to heal and repair that, and continue to engage. Don't step away from it. Because I think the privilege we have and again, I can primarily speak from my experience, is if I don't want to engage in these issues, for the most part, it's certainly on racism, I don't have to. Now on gender issues, a little harder for me to avoid, but there are lots of things I can choose not to get into if I don't want to. And that leaves a lot of people doing a lot of heavy lifting who deserve to have the support of others who genuinely want to help them the way they want to be helped.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing, is to leave aside ego and bring humility to those engagements and look at, how do those people that I'm engaging with, how do they want to be helped? How do they see me and what I can contribute? And if I can, then do that.
Absolutely.
As you were talking about humility and, in the idea of racism, it reminded me, and this is probably it's an expensive exercise, but it's probably an exercise that's worth doing for people if they have the opportunity. And it's this: when I was in the corporate world, I had an international job. I traveled a lot. I traveled a lot in Asia. While I was traveling in Asia, places like China or Korea, or even Japan, I would love to go out and explore on my own. That was I would take downtime outside of the work I was doing to just head out and explore. I'd take my camera and I'd go for walks in places that were off the beaten track. Now, there were two things there. I was the only white person among usually a lot of people who were different than me. But, it's not that they were different. I was different.
And you were on their turf.
And I was on their turf, exactly. I couldn't speak their language and I couldn't understand, although in most places people were so friendly because I looked different. I found actually it was a positive experience. People would talk to me in English and they would test their English skills and they would say, well, you're obviously foreign here. You look like you're lost. Can we help you? That kind of thing. But sometimes it was a feeling like I'm different here, and it was a little bit threatening in some situations. Not that I was in danger, but it was just that feeling of being different.
It's probably uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable, yeah, that's a good word. And the other thing was, of course, in a lot of these places, the signs were in Mandarin script or Korean script or Japanese script, and I thought, I am illiterate here as well. And that whole feeling is quite humbling, and I think it gives you a sense of perspective in that, and a sense of, gee, in our environment, when people from that culture or that nationality are dumped into our environment, like I am right now in theirs, that's what they're feeling probably.
That is what they're feeling. Yeah. And I think for what we have to remind ourselves, and I feel like it's more prevalent now. I don't know if it is, but I feel like the ability to empathize with people, even if you haven't walked a mile in their shoes, even if you haven't been on the ground immersed in their neighborhood or their culture, that there's something we have to remember about being able to connect to people through their stories. And we are so globally connected through the internet and through media that there's a lot of ways to get to know a different culture and a perspective, and to consider things outside of our own experience without having to actually experience them. And I think cultivating that empathy, really understanding that, I mean, if you tie it back to business, I have to really be in tune with my client. I have to know who my customer is. I have to be able to understand their pain, even if it's a pain I'm not experiencing. I have to be able to communicate it with them in a way that makes them feel seen and heard. If I'm doing that with building collegial relationships, or really looking at to be part of a much bigger conversation about community and society, then I need to have the same curiosity that I do when I'm trying to figure out what does my customer want. I have to ask them, and I have to put aside my assumptions, and I have to be open to the idea that the thing I thought is completely not the thing they want. Like we always talk about people building things that nobody wants to buy. And that's because they didn't talk to them, right? And so much of the things that we ask people to do in order to build authentic relationships so they can build successful businesses are also the things we need to do to build successful and authentic relationships so we can build better communities and really prosper, really understand how to support each other in prospering.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And it's, well, I guess a lot of businesses stumble at that first step of really understanding their customers and what their particular needs are. And so it's no surprise that when it gets to the relationship part, that they're not really good at that either because they haven't practiced it.
Correct. It's a great excuse to practice on all fronts. You can start today, even if you don't want to own your own business, even if you just want to be better at whatever it is you're doing today and leading from where you are. Get really curious and be willing to put aside your assumptions
and judgment
we all
as well.
Have them. And judgment, right? Ask why. Be that 5-year-old. Why? And that's what I think about when I think about coachability. If somebody, every time I bring up something different, somebody goes, well, I tried that. I know that that's not going to work here. You don't understand these people. You don't understand my people. You don't understand my customers, whatever the case may be. That to me is you've already lost your curiosity. Even if I'm wrong, I'm not saying I'm right, but even if I'm wrong, you're kind of dismissing it out of hand, which is one of my signals for you're probably not all that coachable. You kind of want me to tell you what you already think you know. I don't want to do that. And you probably don't need a coach if you don't want to be coachable. Yeah.
That's a great point. Well, I can't remember who said this to me, but it stuck in my mind. And I thought that's a really great way to look at this. And it was in the context of somebody would say no. Let's say I ask somebody to be on my podcast and they say, no, I decline. And that wasn't the example, but I can't remember the example now, but it's not important. What they said to me was, take the approach, a no is just for today.
Absolutely.
So if it didn't work, if that person said no to whatever I was offering or pitching, that's today. Tomorrow, the environment might change, their situation might change, your situation might change. So asking the same question could get a different answer. Now, something has to be different, of course. We don't want to be like what Einstein described as just doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
In fact, we don't.
Yeah. All right. Well, tell us.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to switch gears a little bit and get you to tell us a little bit about what you do at Purpose First and how this whole idea of the Purpose First philosophy works and came about.
Sure. I'll go back a little further just to give a little context. I was raised in a family business. My dad ran a family florist in a town not too far from where I grew up. And then I decided that was a really hard way to make a living. You worked nights and weekends and holidays, and it just didn't seem like a great deal to me. So when I went to university, I studied political science, and my first job after graduating was for a women's fund in New Jersey. And that really put me on a path to becoming a professional fundraiser. So I'm very familiar with the no as a maybe, and how to really distinguish a no from a no and a no from a maybe. And to not be discouraged by the no. The no might actually be no and no now and no in the future, but not to be discouraged by that no.
Yeah.
So I really cut my chops.
It's still data, isn't it?
It's still data, right? And then be curious about it. Why? Right. And then I took my first leap into entrepreneurship, really in the context of social entrepreneurship. How do we use business to create social change? And explored a hybrid business model here in the United States, which is called an L3C. It's a limited liability corporation that actually puts social impact before profit, it codifies it. And we built an administrative services company for nonprofits, and we were working with other social entrepreneurs. And that kind of spiraled into the thing I really got excited about in that work was working with the entrepreneurs themselves. Is anybody going to buy what you're selling? And even if that what you're selling is social change, is anybody going to buy what you're selling? Both either with their philanthropic dollars or with their purchasing dollars, their economic dollars. And I kind of parlayed that into working in our innovation district here in St. Louis called Cortex. And there's a entity called the Center for Emerging Technologies. And I spent 2015 to 2017 on staff there and was responsible for running the business model validation program for IT, bioscience, and consumer manufactured product entrepreneurs. So early stage folks in those three areas. And then I turned them into my largest client and went out on my own with Purpose First Advisors. So Purpose First Advisors really was the vehicle for me to move from working with one entity just with early stage companies in these more high growth areas to working with more companies, more individual entrepreneurs, and essentially having two sides of the business. What I would call entrepreneur support ecosystem work, where I'm working with one-to-many, designing or delivering content in a program that's meant to serve a large number, or at least more than one at a time, number of business owners or aspiring entrepreneurs. And then really working with post-revenue businesses, anywhere from a few $100,000 in revenue to $50 million in revenue. That's sort of the span I have right now on what are the crucial operations pieces they need to build the success they want to build. Because most of us get into this, don't do everything 100% right. Didn't even know there were things we should have done differently. Get some traction. People buy what we're selling. We're excited about that. We get a whole bunch of ideas. We have a lot of untapped potential in the business, and we really can't unleash it until we create some systems and processes, until we identify the kinds of people we need, until we are intentional about building culture, and until we really sit down and run the numbers, which a lot of us don't do early on. And then as we grow, all those things have to morph, because what works with a small company doesn't necessarily work with a mid-sized company, doesn't necessarily work with a large company. And so there's this constant iteration of how to actually make the business work. So Purpose First Advisors for me is working with those folks who are growth oriented, whether it's going from $250,000 to $500,000 or going past $1 million or going past 50 million. How can we set you up for success from an operations perspective to really make that possible? And frankly, it's working one-on-one usually with the owners who are in the trenches, doing the work, building the business to take it from where it is today to where they want it to be.
Yeah, well, you touched on a lot of different aspects of business and the growth there. You talked about culture, you talked about the systems, you talked about the numbers, the financial aspect, and what was the fourth one?
Culture, process, people.
People,
numbers.
Yeah, I think people was the one I didn't mention. In terms of, say there's somebody with a small business, they're at this sort of just under the 1 million, that magic ceiling that you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And they're saying, well, I want to break through that. I want to get to the next level, to 5 or the 10 million level. What are the most critical things? What are the things that sort of have to get done first of of those categories, or is there no one that's more important than others?
It depends. But for every entrepreneur, even the $50 million entrepreneur who's gone from 10 employees to 50 employees and is now in 3 states and all of those kinds of things, the first question I ask is, what are we building? What's the vision? And they have to really be able to articulate that. Yes, to me, because I'm asking the question, but most importantly to themselves. And they typically haven't written it down. So knowing you want to go over $1 million is great. Do you want to build a company that eventually runs without you in it? Do you want to build a company that's eventually acquired? Do you want to be acquiring companies? Do you have the vision of building a legacy for your family? Or do you just simply want to not work for anybody else? Those are all, I can hit $1 million with all of those, but they look a little bit different and they're built to do slightly different things. And so really understanding what is it we're building and then where are we today? Let's get crystal clear about what the reality of the situation is today. Are you living paycheck to paycheck in terms of getting paid by your clients? Have you built a reserve? What's in place? Who's in place? What isn't in place? Who isn't in place? So what's the current state of the business? And then from there, what is the natural next step we need to take if we know, in this case, the goal is to reach the million or exceed the $1 million mark? And that's why it depends. So if you don't have a really good handle on your numbers, we probably need to start there. If you have a pretty good handle on your numbers and your accounting's in pretty good shape and we can talk through pricing and that seems to be pretty solid. Okay. Do you have enough people to do the work that needs to be done? Are they the right people in the right seats doing the right thing? Are you still having trouble delegating? Because almost every business owner I know has trouble delegating. That's because you need to write things down about how you want them done. That takes time and it's boring and you don't want to do it. But it's really the stepping stone from doing it all yourself to handing it off to somebody else. So, you kind of go through these natural ideas and sometimes we have to deal with things on parallel tracks, get the numbers in place while we're talking about the org chart. And sometimes we have other things that are clearly most urgent. And until we address those, we're not going to be able to get anything else. Everything else is window dressing until we address those. So it looks a little bit different, but those are the themes we talk about. Because no matter how special your business is, because I know some of us are like, Christy, you need to be in this industry to really understand it. Probably not. I probably need to really understand the business of your business. And you need to be the expert on the industry, and we can probably make some magic happen.
Yeah, that's always, I talk a lot about systems in the past and developing good sound processes. And one of the things I heard a lot was our industry is different. That's not going to work.
So different. So different. Yes, it is. And we need to do that.
Wonderful. One of the things you didn't mention there in that answer was the culture. And I know particularly if a business is growing very rapidly and very strongly and bringing on new people, how do we make sure we're building a good culture? Because that's something that if a business grows rapidly and the culture is not good, not the right culture, even worse, toxic or something like that. It's really hard to bring that back, isn't it, to repair that?
It is. And so my larger clients who have CFOs and, the other things in place, I don't necessarily have to spend as much time with them on, say, building a financial model. And they've probably called me in because the culture piece is where they're having the most struggle right now. The things that you could do as a 10-person office when you were in close proximity with each other, and maybe they weren't perfect and maybe they weren't really explicitly explained, kind of still got massaged out because you were small enough team to do it. Now you don't have that luxury. Everything has to function at a much higher level and with a much greater degree of consistency. I used to think value statements and things like that were kind of just fluff. What I've come to know and see in real life is when we actually get to those values that we want to see and use in our business to make decisions. When we say we're committed to community, or we want to create an innovative culture, or we want to create a place where people can bring them their full selves to work. It's not enough just to have a word or a phrase. It's important to clearly define what that word or phrase means for you and your business, and then be able to give examples of that in action. This is what I mean when we say we prioritize teamwork. This is what I mean because then if what you meant was I pull an all-nighter every other weekend, that's not the kind of teamwork I want to necessarily be around. But if you say our teamwork looks like starting every project with a team charter where we define the rules of engagement and we are clear on what our shared outcomes are, and we delegate roles and responsibility, and we establish how we're going to provide feedback to each other. That's a great teamwork model. I'd love that. Tell me that story all over, right? So you have to really say, as leaders, you have to define what those are and then be able to say, this is what it means to live them here. At Purpose First Advisors, this is what it means to live this value in this place with these people. And then be intentional, not just setting that, but then living it. It's not something you do once and done.
Yeah.
It's every day. And the people part of the business, the humans, the messy humans that show up every day to be a part of your work and your vision need you every day. And I think if we could shift our mindset from doing the meetings with people and the handling of issues and the talking about emotions, and we treat that like it's going to be the other duty as assigned and done at the end of the week or the end of the day or the end of the month in a short little nugget and be done. And we have to flip that paradigm and say, actually being present for your people as a coach and a mentor, as a leader, as a teacher, that's your primary job. And it should take most of your time. And it should take most of your attention. And it should be something you're enthusiastic about doing. And most people in those roles aren't.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily their fault.
They're still
right?
in this
I mean,
mindset
they
of
haven't
holding
been
on
trained
to that.
well. They haven't been trained well. They haven't been given the resources. They don't see their role that way. Other people don't see their role that way. But I think the most angst comes from when people are like, if the people just got it together, we could do this and get it done. And I'm like, yes, but you can't do this without the people. So you've got to spend that time. It's so integral. It's really just so important that we really make sure that we're creating an environment where the people we've brought on to execute the vision we have, which is bigger than we can do by ourselves, are given the tools and resources they need to do that. And so much of the tools and resources they need are time and attention, clarity of purpose and role, recognition, support, the ability to grow, the ability to feel connected to others.
Yeah.
That's culture. That takes work.
And one of the things I think that's important that came out of your explanation there is, as a business grows, the role of the business owner really shifts quite dramatically, doesn't it? And I think that shift, many business owners don't make that shift or don't understand how to make that shift, or maybe that they just don't want to make that shift because they're not the sort of person that can be that mentor, that can be that inspiring leader. And in those instances, there's probably a really hard decision. The business owner, they might have to say, well, I'll keep doing what I'm doing and I'll bring somebody in that's going to take that role.
Yes. We have two ways I think we get in our own way. Whatever's going on between our ears gets in our own way. And then our unwillingness or inability to make decisions that prioritize the organization and the people in it above our own personal needs, wants and needs. And I say that very easily. It's all very, very hard. The idea that you've built something, but you will turn over the reins to someone else in some way, shape, or form is an extremely hard decision to make. And if we get to the point where we have identified that the chief roadblock to getting to where you want to be is something that you're just not really skilled at doing, and you're not willing to make a change in how you behave within the organization, we're at an impasse.
Yeah.
And then it really becomes, what do you want most? Do you want most to stay where you are and be who you are and act the way you do here and do that? And if so, that's fine. Or do you want this other thing you said was really important to you? And are you willing to do the uncomfortable thing to get there?
Yeah, which brings us back to purpose first, right? What's the purpose? Where are we going?
Where are we going, right? And then you can use that vision as a decision-making matrix. If I put it to you as it's never just a binary, but we can continue with where you are and not much is going to change. And you're going to be frustrated. And we can make these changes that are going to feel really uncomfortable. And we can work through the discomfort. But of all the things we've said are most likely to get us where we want to go, these are probably it. Do you want to be uncomfortable where you are, or uncomfortable in a state that's closer to what you want in the long run? Because you're probably going to be uncomfortable one way or the other.
That's right. And
we don't like to be uncomfortable as people. It's not our thing.
Getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is probably a skill that needs to be developed more. But I think in that sense, the one uncomfortable feeling, the current state, I mean, there's a sense of frustration and a sense of not being fulfilled in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
And I think that is that caps the growth. That's not the growth. So the other one is the growth discomfort, and that discomfort, in time, you become more comfortable with whatever you're uncomfortable with, because you're growing. So it's personal growth as well as the business growth.
It is. And that doesn't make any of it easier.
No.
It just means that if we can have a conversation that acknowledge, like if we agree on what reality is, and then we agree on what we aspire to achieve, and we agree about what we think we need to do to get us between here and there, then it really becomes about making decisions. And that's often where we feel like, if I make this choice, I'm cutting off all other options. And people don't like that either. And so the act of choosing, the act of realizing there's a finite amount of time, there's a finite amount of money, there's a finite amount of capacity, and even not choosing is a choice.
That's right. So,
we might have to really, the process of working together might be to really explore that deeply and say, this is at the point in the road we're at. Let's, you're going to have to do some personal work. I'm going to try and support you as much as I can. We might have to call in other resources to help us sort this through. But that, honestly, I've watched a lot of people not get out of their own way. And it's sad.
Yeah. On the other hand, I mean, I've been in situations like that. And when you make that decision, then it's almost like there's a weight off your chest. You're sort of scared and nervous about this decision you've just made and what you have to do, to what the next action steps that you have to take. But at the same time, there's this enormous sense of relief, because kind of things have just started, like it's almost like the veil has been opened up and you're starting to see a bit further.
Yeah, and your team, if your team feels better too, because if you say you want one thing and they start to do the things they know are necessary to get you there, and then you switch course, then that throws them off. That's really hard for them. And so when you actually commit to a direction and define what success will look like and support them in supporting you in making that happen, then you can all row in the same direction. And when it gets scary, you can turn to your rowing buddy and say, this is really scary. Yeah, let's keep rowing. Row faster, right? Versus saying to your rowing buddy, I'm going to change direction completely.
I'm going to paddle backwards now.
I'm paddling backwards on you. And I'm pressing on the imaginary brake as hard as I possibly can, which just causes a whole nother set of problems.
Yeah, great. I love that. Love the metaphor. Yeah. Well, this is fabulous, Christy. I could go on talking these things for ages, but I'm just aware of the time. So I think it's a good point now.
My goodness.
On that note, to move on to the buzz, our innovation round. It's the same 5 questions that I ask of every guest. And the idea is that you'll give us some really insightful answers that will inspire the listener to take some action today as a result.
Okay.
So what's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Innovation is really tied to curiosity. We said it before, but question the default. If you're truly looking to do something in a way that it hasn't been done before, then you have to question the way it's being done.
Why is it being done like that? Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And there's this famous story about the width of the railroad tracks, which is standard across all the world, and why that is. And when you dig into it, it's because that was the width of two horses' rear ends to enable two horses to be put onto Roman chariots, and they formed the ruts in the roads, and so that became the standard width.
There's lots of things that go back to somebody choosing something that at the time made a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
And may not make a whole lot of sense anymore.
Yeah. So there's no relationship between the width of railroad tracks and horses.
It's not a magical measurement.
Yeah, but that's the way it is. Yeah. So question everything. All right. What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
I meet new people and have new experiences. I think that's the way you develop new ideas, because honestly, sitting alone in a room, there's great purpose to meditation and reflection and quiet time to yourself. And there's lots of ways to have different experiences and interact with different people. And I think the more you can do that, the more likely you are to experience the things that are going to help you generate new ideas and see things that you just didn't see before.
Yeah, it comes back to what we talked about earlier around the empathy and having an understanding for other people. So those interactions and those experiences certainly build that. All right. Yes. Do you have a favorite resource you use most often?
My favorite resource, I actually wrote a few notes so I wouldn't forget. And the resources in general, I love to track my time so that I can really understand what I'm working on and what I'm doing. It makes my pricing better. It makes my workflow and being able to schedule for capacity better. And it also takes away the ability for me to pretend that I'm actually spending time doing things that I'm not actually doing. Right. And so in terms of those tools, like just in terms of how do I work better and smarter, I really like tracking my time. It gives me great information.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I kind of do it a little bit, but it's not tracking the time as such. It's more a reflective thing. So what have I done this morning, and going back, okay, that's good. And how's that compare with my plan that I've actually set up yesterday? I was going to do today. And the other thing, I do time blocking, which I find really useful. And
I like that as well.
I set myself an hour now to work on this, and I have to set a timer for that, because if I get really focused on it, all of a sudden I'll be like, oh, it's 4 hours have gone already.
Yes. And also, if I want a project to be, if I know something's due in the future, going and blocking off the time to do it in the pieces, making sure that I don't have to rush at the very end. So using that calendaring purpose, that time blocking purpose, both to make sure I spending the amount of time I want to spend on something, but also making sure I put the time on in advance and don't have to.
Yeah. So suddenly you've
borrow it back from somewhere else at the last minute.
You've got a deadline and you can't get to a whole lot of other things because you have to meet that deadline for one particular project.
Yes.
All right. Now, what's the best way to keep a project on track, or a client on track if you're working with a client?
I really like team charters or project charters. This having a very simple document that's very straightforward. So it's not personal, right? It's not about, well, Christy wants to do it this way. It's we've come together and agreed this is the project goal, or this is the outcome we want from working together. These are the things we're going to do to try and make that happen. Here's who's responsible for what. This is how we're going to operate. This is okay behavior. This is not okay behavior kind of thing. And if we run into an impasse, here's how we're going to resolve conflict. Those, to me, just make everything that we think we know, the implicit knowledge we think we have about how something's going to go, and they make it really explicit. And then we can come back to the document. So if we said we were going to have it done on Tuesday and it's now Wednesday and it's not done, we made an agreement. What happened? What can we learn from that? And how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? The example I use a lot of times is you'll be on a project with someone or working with a client and somebody says, well, that's due at the end of day on Friday. Great. You're going to not only in two different time zones, we're on two different continents. Whose end of day?
Yeah.
What is end of day? Even if we agree on whose time zone we're using, is it 5 p.m.? Is it midnight? It's a thing that most of us don't talk about, but everybody has an opinion on.
Yeah.
You ask the midnight
and they're
person.
Probably different. Yeah. The opinions are probably
and
different.
they think the 5 o'clock person's insane, and the 5 o'clock person thinks the midnight person's insane. So, I just like those explicit tools that help us get on track and stay on track. And then you got to communicate regularly, because talking about it once won't do it.
Yeah, and that needs to be visible. And then, of course, it's pretty easy then to say, okay, that hasn't happened the way we agreed. Yeah, how do we change this? And I like how you said, what do we learn from that? So it's not just around saying, okay, bad, Jürgen, you didn't do this. It's around, well, what happened? Why, what can we, where's the gap? What can we do to make sure that doesn't happen again?
Absolutely.
Yeah, love it. All right. And the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
I'm going to look at my notes very briefly, because I want to also make sure I don't miss anything. I think your differentiation comes down to being really clear about who your ideal client is and not being afraid to focus. So I advise people to spend their time and money trying to connect with the people who are most likely to buy from them. And in my experience, those are people already spending the time and money to solve the problem that you solve.
Yeah.
And now you need to get in front of them with a better solution. If someone else comes to you and wants to pay you money, who's outside of your ideal target market, but you still want to take their money, do business with them, but don't spend your time and money trying to attract them. So I think the key to differentiating is being different and not trying to appeal to everybody and being really specific about who you're a good fit for.
Yeah.
And then sticking with that and not being wooed or swayed to try and be more to everybody just because you might be missing the boat somewhere. Don't let fear of missing out make you drift away from really defining who you are and who you best serve.
Yeah. I love that. And, we spend quite a bit of time with clients and we've got training programs on really defining your dream client. I like to call it the dream client. So who is it? Like if you could only work with one person and you were stuck on a desert island and that person was stuck with you, who would you choose? What would they look like? What would they do? What do they believe? What are their values? We'd go into all of those things. And I like that you pointed out that if somebody else comes to you to pay money and you want to do business with them, then do business with them. Because
take their money, do business with them,
because
right?
That's a lot of the pushback I get is, but what happens if, I'll miss out on some business there. What happens if somebody...
Because they'll describe their ideal client and then they'll say, but what about everybody else?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, if they find you and you want to play together, play together.
Yeah. So I love that. But don't spend money marketing to people outside of that dream client realm. Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Christy. This has been fabulous. Now, where can people reach out and say thanks for all that you've shared today and find out more about Purpose First Advisors?
Well, they can visit us on our website, purposefirstadvisors.com. My email is cmaxfield@purposefirstadvisors.com. And it's at Christy Maxfield on LinkedIn. I try to stay active there and connect there. So please reach out. Let me know what you're thinking and how I might be able to be of service to you.
Excellent. And of course, we'll post the links in the show notes so people can click straight through. So
fantastic.
What action would you like our listeners to take away from our conversation today?
Get really clear on what you want. And don't lie to yourself. Don't answer that question by saying what you think you can get or think you can build, but really get clear on what it is you really want and what will make you happy and what you think the world needs. And then take the next obvious action to make that happen.
And try to...
all you have to do is the next obvious action. You don't have to do all the next actions, just the first one.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you said something earlier as well that I think is important in this context, and that's articulating that, learning to articulate that, because unconsciously in our heads or somewhere in our bodies, we've got this idea or this set of ideas of what we want. But articulating it can be such a powerful tool, right?
And regardless of your belief system, I suggest to you that when you put something out clearly into the world and other people know what you're trying to do, things align to you to make that happen.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally, from where I stand, other people and other energy in whether it's God or however you think of it, they all want you to be happy. And anything you can do to help them be clearer about how happiness looks and feels for you and what success looks and feels like for you, the universe will conspire to help make it happen. It just needs really clear instruction.
Excellent. All right. Well, finally, Christy, who else should I get on the show and why?
Well, if you want to explore the ideas of commercializing technology out of federal labs in the United States, which may be too much of a niche topic, but there's a really crazy, innovative program here in the States called FedTech, and they throw entrepreneurs who have never met each other together with labs and inventors and see if there's businesses that can come out of that. So Mike Bynum at FedTech would be one of the top of my list because he's got a wide breadth of entrepreneurial experience and he's trying to do something that's incredibly hard. Put people who don't know each other together with technology they haven't built to create new things. But, whatever you're interested in, I probably know somebody who knows somebody. So I'd be more than happy to get you connected with a whole host of folks who I think your listeners would really enjoy learning from.
Excellent. Well, we'll start off with an introduction to Mike because that sounds like a fascinating topic to explore, and we'll chat offline for other people.
Fabulous.
So thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us so generously today, Christy. This has been a really fun conversation. I've enjoyed it, and I'm sure there's lots that I know there's lots I've learned out of it. I'm sure there's lots for the listener to take away as well. So thanks again.
Well, it was a lot of fun for me. Thank you.
All the best, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you.